Welcome to Trust Yourself, the podcast. The place where we learn that trust is earned and not given, even with ourselves. I'm your host, Betsy. I'm extraordinarily glad that you're here. Stick around. Ayesha, Ophelia, that is who we have on the show today. It is incredible whenever we meet. As you listen, you'll hear sparks fly. The topic today, I feel like, is so incredibly important, especially as we're going now into year 3 of the pandemic. So many of us have lost loved ones, lost jobs, lost relationships, lost dreams that we thought would happen. I've been honored recently to work on a few different projects that are aimed towards helping people like me, people like you, move through these losses. Ayesha has 2 different courses, Grief as an Ally and The Way to the Heart. I named the show Grief as the Way to the Heart in honor of her 2 courses, her work, and really what we're talking about today. It's not as heavy as you might think. You might find some surprises, and there's definitely so many juicy gems for your healing and for our collective healing. Enjoy. Welcome, Ayesha, to the show. It is so awesome to have you here. I absolutely love when we connect. You're one of the unicorns that when we connect, I'm like, I must be doing something right in my life that we actually got to get together. So thank you for being here, and thank you for elevating my life.
Of course. I love it that we just are like this in each other's timeline, but whenever we do come back in, it's just like all good, and it's good to catch up. So I'm honored to be here to, just have a conversation.
Yeah. Now, just before we started, I had asked you if you'd be willing to talk about grief, because last time when I asked you to be on the show, you were in the throes of grief. You said something really profound. You can't catch death, and it's just a part of the space, and you're happy to talk about it. People are afraid of it. I want to ask you, I don't want to make any assumptions. So I want to meta process and say, before we started recording, I was not afraid of death or talking about death, but I was afraid of upsetting you, right? That's my people pleasing, right? And I'm like, oh, I don't want to upset her. She's on the show. But you're like, that doesn't upset me. Fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But I personally am not afraid of death. But there's reasons behind that. I've had to face death so often, on a regular basis in my own life. Mm-hmm. The way that you spoke about it, it seems like you're not afraid of death either. I don't want to make that assumption, but can you talk about your personal relationship to death?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these words like death, which can be used as a metaphor for any type of ending, obviously including the physical body. But the course is called Grief as an Ally. So I'm like, okay, I think death is an ally, actually. I think endings actually do something really important for the humans and human psyche, to let something totally end and then let it begin with fresh new life. Mm-hmm. So yeah, these aren't topics that I've shied away from, because I really view them as allies in my life. And I'm not sure exactly if that just happened through my own experiences of death and grief. But I've really been called to speak about this work and to share this work with people, and to really help shift the conversation into something that isn't necessarily upsetting. The thing about grief is it's so, maybe it's just how the body stores it. You can be totally fine, and it can be, a certain day where people would think you'd be sad. So for instance, when my mom passed, or her birthday, everyone's like, oh my God, are these days when you're really, really sad? And I'm like, actually, more times than not, there are days when I feel really connected, and I'll just be like in the supermarket on a random Wednesday, and I'll smell a smell, and my mom, I'll just be like taken to my knees, and I really feel like grief and death are a way to give us more aliveness if we really let it happen. Like, how many people are just walking through life as sort of a corpse, and like, what actually stops you? And you're like, okay, I'm breathing, like my heart's beating. And for me, it's these big things that bring me down to my knees. And it's actually the type of relationship I want to have with life. And so I think when we can look at these forces as allies, we can really start to have more aliveness, actually more of the things we've been asking for, but we have to be willing to look in the shadows. It is scary. Actually, you know what? I am afraid of death. I'm not going to lie. But in the same way that I have massive respect for plant medicine, it's like, okay, I'm going into this space and I know something's going to be revealed to me that I might not know, but I trust myself to like get through it. And that's the same reverence I have for death. Like, it is scary, but it's something that I talk about all the time and have considered and sort of want to prepare as much as you can for. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. There's so much in what you just said that I want to respond to. I'm going to start with something that isn't really surface, but I just have to say, aren't you like a triple Scorpio or something like that?
Yeah. I was, I didn't want to like bring up astrology because I'm like, okay, and like, yes, based on when I was born and my astrology, I'm really suited to be like a funeral keeper or like just dealing with things that a lot of people don't want to deal with. And I actually feel really lucky. Like, so I have a lot of Virgo and a lot of Scorpio, and Virgo rules the part of the body that's like the guts, just like blood and guts. And, Scorpio is just like your seat. It's everything that's in your womb, right? It's deep down. It's like hidden. So the occult mysteries, I'm like, sign me up.
Death, rebirth, the darkness, dark side. So there's, again, I'm going to keep hitting the notes of back to what you just said, but I'm literally like right before we met just now, I was on Netflix and I was watching the John of God documentary series. And I didn't know the whole big reveal that happened with him. I didn't know about his dark side, but for my own darkness, right? I've realized that I was raised in several cults. One of them being the cult of covert narcissism. And I coined the cult of narcissism myself, but I realized I'm not the one who coined it. There's other things out there that said it, but narcissism works pretty much just like a cult mathematically. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because I see you as someone who, and feel you as someone who can talk about these things, who can hold this space, who can talk about the shadows. And, I just knew what was going to be happening in this documentary. You just know why there's a documentary made. When I think that, we don't need to like mince words, but to get down into the details, to sort of explore it, to sort of do a surgery on it, as it were. I feel like the way that you talked about death and the shadow is something like, so I teach other people how to trust their intuition. And part of that, if they want to, is using their intuition with other people as a way to gain their own self-esteem in it. And I was doing some one-on-one mentoring recently with somebody who is already a professional reader. And I told them, I was like, that fear that you have that you're not going to get it right before you meet with someone will never go away. Like, period, end of story. You could be doing work for 50 years. And before you meet with someone, that voice will come up and it will say, what if I don't get it right? Or what if the person gets upset? Or what if they write a negative review or whatever, right? And that could be a speaking gig. It can be anything. It doesn't have to do with like just psychic work. That voice will absolutely never go away, but you develop the confidence, you develop the comfortability, you develop the, as you said, you like that energy that you developed of like, I'm still going to go into the ayahuasca ceremony knowing that there might be something that's really uncomfortable to deal with. And so I feel like it's funny, in my eyes, that equates that you're not afraid of it because you're able to develop the courage is what it is. And the self-trust, as you said. But yeah, I mean, it's like we always have an ego, right? The ego's job is to keep us alive and hang on to things and the familiar and stuff. Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like that's on target?
Yeah, totally. I kind of like the tension of both and like that's what actually brings me into the space respectfully, because there's some people that are come in and they'll be like really too cocky, and so I like to find that space of I totally trust myself and there is some fear coming up. That's why we have, someone wrote this quote, it's not mine, but that's why we have courage, because at some point, I think it's Clarissa Pinkola Estes, we just like That's why we have the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. That's why we feel inspired when someone gets up off their knees and like does something for the first time. And what a powerful archetype to be able to play with. But yeah, I mean, I think it's both. And I think that's what keeps me like honest and trustworthy in the space, that tension between those, you know, that like middle path.
I have like full body chills over and over and over right now because 5 minutes before we met, I solved a problem that I have been investigating for 7-8 months now. So I was guided to watch a whole bunch of cult documentaries before I even knew why, before I knew I was involved in a cult. And I was like, oh, okay, 2.5 seasons into the Scientology documentary, which I wouldn't even normally watch. I was like, oh, this is giving me the math of how to escape the cult that I am in. Okay, now I know what's going to happen when I leave. There's going to be a huge backlash. There's going to be all this stuff. And I was like, okay, now I'm prepared. And it's because of that I could leave peacefully. They not on their side. They're extraordinarily upset. But for me, I could just see through it and just be like, thank you. I'm going to, stay away from you. So I have a whole team of spirits that are working with me, ancestors and all this. And there's a couple of spiritual leaders that I've directly worked with that have passed, that have incredible, really dark, dangerous dark sides. And we all have dark sides. And the problem that I solved through watching the John of God documentary is I said, okay, what is it? I mean, there's even a teacher that I had worked with that's still alive now that exhibits some of the same qualities that I have walked away from because of the, ignoring of like, don't look what's going on over in the corner over here. It's the awareness, it's the humility, it's keeping the fear that you just talked about. It's like, I'm keeping this, I'm walking with reverence, knowing that it's not me. And I was thinking of you in this context, because I was like, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is because you don't shy away from the darkness on your social media pages, on your courses. You let it out there. And I'm like, okay, because, the last thing I want to do is, hide this sort of shadow. And I know that like, that's literally, I mean, narcissism is sort of a metaphor, but it's true. The narcissism doesn't have that reverence. It's very cocky. It's just like, I know, although it's, hiding that really big fear. So you're literally echoing. I'm like, okay, I've got it now. It's just people who hide the shadow and people who say, I've got it all. I am John of God. I can do no wrong ever. Ever. Like, do not trust those people.
Yeah. I mean, we're in a time where the shadow is revealing a lot of things about integrity and charisma. And, I've worked for so many people, and let's just tell the truth. There's a lot of people that aren't well in wellness, period. Right. And they still may have something to offer, and they still may need to get checked and grow up. Like, we're all being asked into a higher level of maturation with spirit, with ourselves. And I think one thing that's really been helpful for me along the way, because I've been in situations where I'm like, oh, like we're all like, everyone's too much bought into this like person as this pillar. And maybe there is a good idea that we want to like deconstruct and take back for ourselves. And I've really just been take what you can and leave the rest. And honestly, a huge skeptic as much as I am a believer. And it's really kept me sort of like out of those, like how do we differentiate like lack of light, darkness, and then that sort of like twisted ego, a lot of the stuff that we see going on that's a little bit darker than that. Like, what are the words that you use to differentiate that? I feel like I've heard someone really explain it well. Yeah.
I wish that I had words. And because I'm like literally learning this as someone, I mean, I'll be completely honest, it's been since the summer that I got out of these cults. So I feel like a newborn, right? And that's like when you said the word charisma, I mean, you can't see me on the podcast, but like I put my hand over my forehead. I was like, oh, charisma, because I literally just realized that someone who is so charismatic, it's not a good thing. It's an indicator of these things that we're talking about, and it loops. It's exactly what you said. I don't even have the words.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I think we're all in cults, and I think it's interesting to think about them as an archetype. And also, obviously, people can really be hurt by these energies that are swirling around us. But even this summer, I was sort of like wrapped up in this relationship with someone who was very charismatic. And it's like, it's like I knew that the charisma was dangerous in that way. I think like the opposite of charisma is authenticity.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe it's not. I don't want to like put them too far apart, because I think it's like a fine line, but a lot of charismatic characters can be hiding quite a bit of
well, it is. This is a thing I learned. So I was raised by a covert narcissist, and there's so little of information about covert narcissism in the world. Every time you look up, like, is so-and-so a narcissist, they're talking about all the other types of narcissism. There's a really good book, The Passive Aggressive Covert Narcissist. And that is a book in the intro that she says, this book is created because no one else is talking about it, and it's vastly different. And if you look up, like, oh, is my charismatic partner a narcissist? Well, they don't really match those things. And then you look up covert narcissism and you're like, whoa, no wonder. And I do believe because I had a similar thing happen over the summer. And I'm used to the charisma because I was raised by a charismatic person. And so that's what I equate with love. And that's what is so attractive. And it's like this confidence and bravado and all this stuff. Well, that also comes with the love bombing, right? And so all of that comes, they tell you exactly what you want to hear, when you want to hear it, those kinds of things. And I love what you're saying. Like, you don't want to pit authenticity and charisma against one another, for sure. Because I've noticed that the charisma masks itself as authenticity in the beginning. But when I encourage anyone who is like even curious or has mildly familiar with this in their life to read that book, because it goes over all of the signs that you're like, oh my gosh, that happened to me. And oh my gosh, that happened to me. Right. How did they say exactly what I wanted to hear? Like, that makes no sense, but it's this calculating thing. I want to say about, we're all involved in sort of cults. Again, it's a both and. I love it. Right. Yeah. I do believe that. I also like to step away from sentences of like, you didn't say this, but this is in the same sort of category. Like, oh, well, we're all a little narcissist, or we're all empaths, or we're all this, we're all that, because they are very specific dynamics. And I feel like, cult is like, you could really see anything as a cult. You could see an organic farm or organic.
Exactly.
Farm.
Or like, I like cheese making, and I'm with these other cheese makers all the time.
Right. Exactly. But it's interesting because way before I even realized all this stuff, with narcissism and cults and stuff, I had this proactive sense to always check myself and be like, is there anything cult-like about this? And I would like literally go through it. Hey, it's 222.
Yes.
Yay! So we're taping on February 22nd, 2022, and it's 2:22 here on the East Coast. So, and then I would proactively say to my community, like, hey, the reason why this is not a cult is because cults do. And in this environment, you are always encouraged to trust yourself more than the group, trust yourself much more than me.
Totally.
And I've found, and it sounds like this is just your MO, but I found for me that I know that I am healthy, and I don't want to say graduated, but moved to a certain amount of health and independence when I start to disagree with the person that I'm studying with. It doesn't have to be in some major dark way, but I'm like, yeah, they're a person, they don't need to be on a pedestal. And I will tell my clients, especially if we're coaching one-on-one, I will tell them in the beginning, like, you're welcome and encouraged to disagree with me. And at some point you will. I'm not all knowing. Yeah. I am just a person helping you out. And it's almost like I want to applaud them even more when they step out of that codependence and putting me on a pedestal and be like, you know what, you said this and I'm going to do the opposite. And I'm like, great, like do it. That's a good thing. I want to ask you, can you please talk about grief as an ally, your course, because it just sounds so fascinating. And thank you for having that. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, it's powerful work. It's something that I've been really guided to after my mom passed away and wasn't sure what shape or form it would take. And it really took like 6 years or so to land. And then about 2 years ago, I started doing these death meditations and was offering them in groups. And it kind of just all of that information. And, it's not just my work. There's so many teachers. And I say this, with deep reverence for all of the people I've learned from. And then, of course, just my own experience. So I created a 5-week immersion, and each week is a different initiation. And we look at sort of the mythic bones of grief and how it is this energy and archetype, and it's found in so many places. We get to tell our stories, which is huge. I was going to get something. Actually, the first time I was doing Grief as an Ally, I realized that my dad had done this course called Mending Hearts. My dad's a psychologist. So back when I was a kid, my mom like sewed all these pillows so people could like hold them in their sessions. And I feel like I have it somewhere. It's right here. I'll get it. Also, those are my parents up there.
Oh my goodness. That looks like it's from a love retreat. Like,
right.
Yes.
Right. I'm making t-shirts, but this is the pillow that my mom, and she made so many. And of course it's a treasure now that she's not here in body. And I think there are cultures that get the whole grief thing right. Like we need a grief lodge. We need time just to sit and cry and mourn and do what's like authentic beyond any teachings we've ever had. It's like, if you trust the body knows how to die. It knows how to do all these things. And so if we bring ourselves together, so much magic happens. And so, I think the whole idea is, so I ended up calling it Big Feelings, Grief as an Ally, because it's not just grief. It's like, grief can be like rose you didn't take, almost love, things you thought, okay, I'm actually fine with that. And then it starts to accumulate and you realize you have sort of a lifetime of these little endings that were never honored. And we get to come together in ritual and come together and witness each other. And it's just like, I don't think I'll ever not want to do it, even if I'm not actively grieving something, like being alive, being a water sign, being in Pisces season, or like, is everyone not feeling something right now? So it's just kind of making peace with that we are these emotional weather vanes, and the emotions come through. Like Rumi says, every day there's a different visitor. Do we keep turning grief away until it turns into something that's chronic or a disease? Do we keep turning our fear away, or do we say, you're welcome here? Come, let's chat.
I was like, I want to have some friend time after this, but I'm like, I'll just share now.
Okay.
I literally just got to that part in Women Who Run with the Wolves, where she's talking about grieving all of the roles that you didn't take and the roads that you didn't take. And, you thought you would go to grad school, but you had a baby. So and maybe you didn't mourn that. Right.
Exactly. That's cansos. That's cansos.
Yes, exactly. And so it's really funny because I said a lot of the things in that book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, there's a lot of practices and maybe even physical things that I personally wasn't familiar with. And so it's almost like I'm seeing it from this like anthropologist sort of like, oh, cool. Now it's here. Now I can work with it. And she starts talking about the memorial crosses that you see on the side of the road. And I'm like, well, I'm familiar with that. And it was funny to have her speak about something that I was familiar with in that way. And I was like, okay, I'm familiar with that. And, I've lost my entire biological family and everyone associated with them. And I mean, it's even wiped out like 90% of my friends as well. And so I'm going through this great grief, this great period of loss. And I'm also going through all my belongings. And there's this gold cross with a tiny diamond in it, which is just completely inappropriate for me in like thousands of ways. And when it was given to me, in a covert narcissistic way, where one of the things they'll do is they'll always ruin holidays. And if you say, I really like silver jewelry, what kind of jewelry are you going to get? You're going to get gold jewelry. So it's a very passive aggressive thing. So I was like, I kept for like 3 weeks being like, what am I going to do with this gold cross with the diamond in it? What am I going to do? And I was given it like when I was like 16 or something, and still had it. And she's talking about making an actual cross and putting it in the ground to, as you even said, to mark the ending.
Yeah.
And not only this, I'm reading this in a coffee shop, and I'm like, oh, now I know what I'm going to do with that gold cross with the diamond. I'm going to bury that. And this can really memorialize the ending. I'm here. And, there's a lot of times where I will Shazam a song, like you hear a song in in a coffee shop, like, oh, I really like that. And Shazam's an app that will listen to it and tell you what song it is. But I've never done it for a song that doesn't have words. And so I'm like reading this thing, and I really like this like lo-fi beat that's playing, and I Shazam it. And it's like, literally, I'm reading this thing. I decide I'm going to bury this gold cross with a diamond in it, and I'm going to mark this ending. I Shazam it, and it's called Ho'oponopono.
Nice.
Yeah. Just, the Hawaiian prayer
for
forgiveness and marking the endings and moving on. I was just like, wow. So yeah, that is what happened with that cross with the diamond on it. It is buried and it's moving on.
Yeah.
Here's something, and you mentioned like a breakup and stuff. I don't know if you actively talk about it in class, but I think I'm being called to talk about, it's definitely relevant in my family, but breakups particularly, or grieving the loss of a person who's still alive, right? I feel like for me, it makes me even sad to say that, like, I'm used to this, but I dated so many narcissists in my life, even from the first one. So when I was 19, I had to grieve someone who was deeply embedded in me, who was still alive and is still alive today. And I had to go through all of that processing of like, the person that I dated is no longer alive. The person that I loved is no longer alive. And I'm walking through this grief, but like, their body is still walking around with their voice, with their hair, who's still expressing love for me. And the same thing with my family, right? Like they're all living and they are all communing together, commiserating together. Can you speak on that? Grief with people who are still alive?
Yeah. I think a part of our brain wants it to logically make sense. Like, okay, this is what grief is, and this is how it works. And this is, it makes sense to grieve someone who's no longer here. But when we're talking about grief, we're also talking about this, like, sort of this thing that can't be quantified in that way, And so actually, that's what I love the most, the things that you can't, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's like, we can be actively grieving something that's still alive. We can be actively even grieving something that wasn't good for us, And when I think about grief, and especially like this is the work of Martine Pretel, who says that grief is simply like love unexpressed, And so to think about it as an energy like that, and to also think about it as, okay, if someone is gone, I've loved them this much. I need to grieve this much. Like when I grieve, I need to look like I've grieved. It's not this just sort of like pat the eye and move on. It's like, screaming to the gods, why me? Why now? And getting that kind of grief out allows you to be able to come to some sort of relationship with that loss. Cause like you said, it's going to be ever evolving. It may never end. It's going to change shapes and forms. And it's all about, for me, finding that like intrinsic quiet place within myself that can be with it, or the place that's raging, but just like making peace with whatever weather is coming along with how I feel about whatever loss, whether it's a perceived loss, actual loss, almost love, like it all hurts, right? We're
Yeah.
proof, we're proof of the sensitivity of life. And everyone has such a unique story with their grief. And that's a part of it too.
Thank you. I'd never thought about this before. It came up in my mind a few bits of our conversation ago before, and I don't feel like it's trivial. It kind of sounds like it. Can we talk about FOMO being a part of unexpressed grief?
Mm.
And like FOMO seems to me like, the concept of fear of missing out is as a coin, as a term, is basically new with social media, and that makes sense because now we know what other people are doing and all of that. I mean, it could have happened before that. Like you just come back from Hawaii and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so mad I didn't go, right? Like that could happen. It didn't happen as much. But I feel like if we as individuals or as a culture were healthy with grief and loss, as you said, there are some cultures that do it right, which I totally agree with.
Yeah.
I feel like we wouldn't have FOMO. I feel like FOMO it's almost like that part of us, that monster that just like wants more and wants more and wants more, and that's the part of grief. That's the almost purpose in one way of grief, is letting go so you can be a flow so that you can handle more. But it's like, if you're in FOMO, and this is a complete generalization, I don't feel like this is always the case, but perhaps if there's FOMO going on, perhaps there's grief that you're not actually doing, and it's just this more sugar, more sugar, more sugar kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Totally. It's like the inner crackhead, actually. It's the part of us that's never satiated. And I think, so we are in a really unique time. We are sort of navigating, no matter what your beliefs are about, if you've done this before, like if you're here, we're in a time of like all-time exposure where just so much information is coming in, and we're trying to learn how to be in right relationship with that. And at the same time, we're trying to tend to ourselves, especially with anything that's unexpressed. So it can turn us into these like, I don't know, just like not quite organic humans. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it can make our movements not even our own. We can just be, So, I mean, I hear you. And I think that that's an accurate way of understanding this whole FOMO thing,
Yeah. Which people don't really talk about that much, but I'm not immune to FOMO. I mean, I can't think of a time when I did, but I'm putting two and two together, being like, okay, well, I've been dealing with death and grief since before I was born. So it makes sense that I'm just like, whatever, y'all do your thing. I don't need to worry about that. Well, let's talk about you and trusting yourself, because since I met you, I'm just like, this woman knows how to trust herself. I mean, we never, I don't want to say never, but most of us express that we don't 1000% always walk the path of trusting our intuition. So I just want to put that out there. But I do feel like a lot of us have cultivated it, can speak to it. So if you could take these questions in whatever order you want, you can weave in and out. The three questions are: when and how did you learn how to trust your intuition? And telling us about a time when you did trust your intuition and what happened. And a time when you didn't and what happened. And preferably like if logic was telling you not to trust, or logic was telling you, all of that.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah.
The mischief maker in me feels excited. Okay. You know what? My friend said something last night that I really enjoyed, and it said, you can be a work of art and a work in progress. So I will say that I've had this like, that's very
beautiful. Yes.
Isn't it? It's so nice, right? So it keeps getting better, right? And I think I've always had this like inner mother, that's the way I'd put it, that was very strong within me. And I don't listen to it all the time. It's not about walking this perfect walk. It's actually about, for me, it's like, how do you pull yourself up once you're down? And I don't know. I mean, a lot of it, I don't know, but I feel like it's something that I've definitely built upon and have really been more interested in how to feed my roots. So my fruits are true. So I'm like, okay, the root feeds the fruit. It's just what I've been talking about all the time. And I have been in this ever evolving relationship with my intuition. And I mean, even just like getting to know you with your stop, drop, and roll, that just really hit with me. That just really made a lot of sense for me. And Okay, a story, and I'll start with.
Can I ask you? And I don't usually interject, but I want to ask you something because it's
Okay.
so strong.
Okay.
First of all, I love the answer of I don't know. I mean, it's very authentic. But I want to ask you. So when you were a little one, and that inner mother voice came in, right? Like there had to be times when you like stood up for yourself or stood away from things or went into things or acted different. Like, do you know about those times when you were using it when you were younger?
You know, I think my sort of like every animal has a defense. And lately I'm like, okay, I'm about that opossum energy, which is like, if someone's coming at you and they're like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. It doesn't matter what you say, play dead. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Just put your hands in the air and try to walk back. Like, I think that's smart.
Narcissism. So that's great.
Yeah. So I think that like in my defense, I'm looking at a scorpion, and I think it's like, I spent a lot of time by myself, sort of like tuning that tune, so I could come in the room and I'd be like, I could know pretty quickly about this person, you know, like their in their energetic signature. Do I feel safe?
Time.
Exactly. Do I like it? Do I not? And I'm not saying that's just who I was as a kid. I love to, like, if someone sent me to my room, I'd be like, yes, like books and imagination. And like my real friends were mostly invisible for a while.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's
a lot of things. Yeah.
Exactly. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, it does. It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So back to, my most recent story with sort of not, and it's not that I didn't not trust my intuition. I think sometimes, like, so in my dreams a lot, if there's a snake or a scorpion or something scary, I'm usually going to go up to it. And often I like receive a bite, or I receive something that feels like poison at first. But ultimately what it's doing is going in there and taking out other impurities like it. And yes, there is a purge of it, and it does feel uncomfortable at times. But I think the last time I didn't listen, or what was I doing? What was my soul doing? That's what I'm really trying to figure out now. It's like, you know, everything's so on the surface and so masculine that it's like, he's treating you bad. Just get out the door, girl. Duh. But like, if it was that easy, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like tending the hearth at a soul level. I'm like, okay, let's sit down. If you are in this situation where you should know better, but you don't, what's happening and what's going on? And so I'm looking at myself in that way as I'm telling the story. But yeah, I was friends with someone who was very charismatic and but I was just kind of getting to know. And there were a lot of warning signs, but I just kind of like, I stayed close. And I definitely stayed close enough to like receive a bite, which was a betrayal, and felt like, oh my God, I should have known this. And when I sort of woke up out of the charismatic sleep I was in, it was like, duh. Do you know what I mean? It was like, it was so obvious to me. And I think that part of that, what that darkness gave me was like, oh, now my intuition feels razor sharp. It feels so clean. Like I feel like more like myself. It felt like someone took the little things when you're about to flatline, and here was my heart. It was like one of those moments where I was like, life's never the same, you know? And it was a tower moment. But what happens in tower moments is that everything that's false falls away. And, you know, there are times where we go to sleep at the wheel and we need a little bite on the leg. And that's what it felt like. Spirit was like, oh, wake up.
It's so good you mentioned that, because sometimes like I don't use tarot for other people, but I use it for me sometimes. And if I'm afraid, like the card hasn't come up, but if I'm afraid to see it, then I know something needs to happen. Bring on that tower. Then I'm like, I probably don't even need that card. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, like the Scorpio card's the death card, and no one likes to see the death card. But actually, when I see it, I'm like, oh, okay, wow. Yeah. This person is about to be completely reborn if they let themselves be deconstructed enough. Like the energy, that's what the energy of death is about. It's about more life, but also it's scary because some of those changes require deep, deep excavation of pain. And it's not that like, it's that we forgot, actually, because as children and as more pure vessels, we sort of remember how to do all of this stuff intrinsically. And then we just get all these layers of like sediment on top of this like golden chalice of a human that we get to be. And so it's more just this process of remembering, and we're all in it. And that's how I view it. That's how I work with myself. That's how I work with people.
Just briefly, when I was married to a covert narcissist, no surprise, I didn't even know what covert narcissism was. I was in this long-term women's support group. It was just women supporting women,
Mm-hmm.
and we spent a lot of hours on the phone together. And there was a point where I knew that the relationship was abusive, and I knew that it wasn't healthy, and I knew it wasn't going to change.
Mm-hmm.
But I actively told the women in the support group, I said, I'm not going to leave until I understand why I'm here.
Bam.
Yeah. And because I understood enough, this is just what I believed, that if I left without understanding, that it would be manifested in the next relationship, even more difficult, even more covert. And so I was like, yeah. And then I figured it out just enough. It was like I woke up to the actual patterns, and then I played the possum role, because that's with narcissists. You cannot win, you cannot argue, you cannot defend, you can't do any of that stuff because you're giving them supply. You can't react.
Exactly.
So
yep. It'll be like a fire that just keeps getting doused.
Or gray locking and gray rocking. I've heard it both. So you're literally just gray, neutral. Okay. Yep. I agree with you, even if you don't. And I was able to do that for the very first time, and it completely switched the dynamic. And I left like 3 days later. But I just was out without anything knowing about any of that stuff, like on the internet. But that's what gave me the power, was to see it from within.
Yeah.
You know, with the, what do they call it? With the evil that, or whatever it is. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Because otherwise I would meet somebody else and I wouldn't know them as well. And it would be a lot harder for me to see those dynamics.
That's right.
I think that that's really important, and especially for people. I mean, it's a common thing of like, well, this isn't right, I'm just going to leave, I'm just going to divorce. Well, even that bravado that you have, that's a little bit of like, well, I'm not going to look within and see what I did. This person
exactly. Thank you. No, that's exactly it. And we're talking about that shadow work of going down into the root, and it isn't logical. Again, grief isn't logical. If someone's in a situation where they're harming themselves, which, happens on all different levels, there also is something going on like that within the soul that needs to be seen. And, I view myself as a multidimensional person, and I still feel like, okay, there has to be this groundedness to my spirituality as well. It can't just be all, stars and rainbows and, get me off this planet. It's like, I have a body. Yeah. I feel things. So yeah, for me, it's been this just great return to sort of the sacred wisdom of the body, and of being willing to look at things on a soul level and not just a logical level. Because this is what people try to do. They try to cut something off at the top, and the root still has the rot in it, right? And so we're talking about how to go down into these dark corners and really right this root part of us, so our fruit could not just be shiny with worms in it. It's like actually beautiful, cultivated fruit. And this is what maturation is about, and that's, I do want to be like a crone. I don't just want to get older. I want to get wiser. I don't just want to keep repeating stuff. I want to have different, new, exciting ways to fall down and get back up.
Right. Well, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I'm not trying to belabor a point. It's just very relevant. Narcissism is not our future, it's our now, right? Many of our political leaders, many of the corporation leaders are all narcissists. The charismatic cult leaders and religious leaders, narcissists, right? They're ruling our world right now. It's ruling our narcissism, and selfishness extreme is ruling our world, right? We're not taking care of the environment. We're taking care of our needs now, right? And don't look what's behind the curtain. If you don't know what you don't know, like the example that you were talking about, you've got to look.
Yeah.
And in my case, this brought you up with the roots, is when you, for instance, when you're raised by a narcissist and you do wake up to those patterns, and you do either break away or mitigate that with boundaries, what one needs to do is you need to actually figure out who you are and what you like.
Yeah.
And that's, I ripped everything out of its roots, and I have found that I've been going through this whole developmental stages, And I even recognized it at the time. And I talked a little bit about this on social media. I recognized I was in my teenage rebellious stage, and I picked up tobacco cigarettes and I said, I'm a fucking teenager right now, and this is not going to be permanent. It was 11 weeks of that. And then it was completely done. Then I was able to put them down and not even look back. And it's like, we don't know that, then what? We're going to be shitting on ourselves and all of that stuff. And now I'm like, okay, now I'm like 22, on the 222 day. And it's like, 22 is still a baby. You don't know what you're going to do with the rest of your life. You know, you still have decision fatigue. If I could do anything.
Yeah, everything that's happening that you've been talking about, is the way that I see it in my life, and the way I'm purging it is that coming back to this sense of the whole in the community. And I got up to get this quote, and it's like one of my favorites right now. And can I share it?
Please.
So it says, "This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. My life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." And I think that for some reason, a big chunk of this generation thinks life is supposed to make us happy. We've forgotten that joy comes from intrinsically being a part of a community and sort of playing our role to the fullest ability. And I'm even guilty of this, where I'm like, okay, I'm not happy. Like, there's something that's not making me happy. And it's because I'm not viewing myself as a part of this intrinsic whole and showing up in this way that that happiness is a byproduct of. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have this up on my thing, and I look at it often. If I'm trying to be a feverish clod of ailments with life trying to make me happy, I'm like, snap out of it.
You just answered a really deep question that I haven't even had time to go into therapy. I told my therapist, I'm like, we're going to talk about this someday. We're just going over all these other things of why is it that I've never wanted to kill myself? Life has dealt me fucking shit for so long. And statistically, people on the autism spectrum, which I am, kill themselves more. People who are victims of Munchausen by proxy either kill themselves or kill their abuser. Empaths, mediums kill themselves. People who are excommunicated from their entire community kill themselves. People who have been taken all their money by other people kill themselves. And I'm like, why is it I have never had those inklings to do that? I was been wondering so much, even when the narcissists were telling me that I was going to kill myself when I never wanted to respond to that extreme. You just answered it with that quote. It's because intrinsically I know that it's not the things that happen to me, and that I have a purpose. And that it doesn't, and there's no such thing about success with it or whatever. It's like, whatever is happening now is not an indicator of the future. It's not an indicator of where I'll be or how I'll serve or how many people will, be in this cycle of giving and receiving with me. And like, I seriously, for 7 or 8 months have been trying to answer that question. So that was really deep.
Yeah, me too, though. It's like, that's the beauty of coming together again, is that we sort of like have these overlapping themes. And this is something I've been, that's really been deep and meaningful for me. And it's like landed in a new way. So it's amazing to hear that's been helpful. Yeah.
How about a time when logic said you shouldn't trust yourself and you did? I mean, by the way, I think the story that you told is that answer.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
You have another story. Why not?
Let's think. Well, I mean, maybe it'll just come specifically as I'm talking more, but the first thing I think of is when you have this inner feeling of peace, even though like the road looks kind of rocky. And that's happened a lot, where I'm like, okay, I've been offered this thing, or this door needs to open and I'm not going to worry about it. If it does, it does. And then it's just like, boom, smooth sailing. And to me, that's what it feels like when I'm in tune, right? So this time where I learned this lesson, it felt like I was pushing a boulder up, or I just was forcing. I just wanted the puzzle piece to fit. And I was sick of my old reality, and I didn't want to wait, long enough for the new one to lock in. And so that was a part of that. And so I mean, I've had so many experiences that have felt like, just like the wind on my, I don't know, just like an angel blowing on my back, just like, okay, yes, go.
Yeah.
And when you're, it's like a lesson or a blessing, or what do they say, a season, and so I think I was learning a big lesson that moved me forward, and put me into a somatic experience of what my yes is and what my no is, and really honoring that and coming back, because I did have reservations and I was really kind of dragging my feet because I was trying to force. And so if there is force there, then now for me, it's like an indication to breathe and come back to myself, and come back to that story you were saying, like, this present doesn't have to be your future unless you keep recreating it by not being awake and not bringing your presence to this moment. So,
all right. So there's nothing that you said that I'm like disagreeing with. It's a both and.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just thinking of from a listener's perspective. You were saying, and it's just like this flow, and the doors open and things like this. I think from my perspective, a lot of times people believe like that's what intuition, like if you're doing it right, then the doors just open for you. And I agree with the pushing thing. And it's almost like, to distill it, to really just put it in a nutshell. It's like, if your ego's pushing and you're impatient and you're just trying to run away from what doesn't feel good, then you will feel like you're pushing a boulder. But can you think of a time, and it's okay if you can't, we can just speak on it, of like, you knew something was going to work out and you didn't need to push it, but all these things were up and down, and you were, you spoke to that, and then it does just open. Yeah. But to me, like that requires tenacity. You have to keep, without attachment, you have to keep pinging the situation, or emailing the person and being like, if it happens, it doesn't, blah, 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 but this is my intention. I'm here, and a lot of times people will do what I call the cycle of doubt, where they'll have an inspiration from spirit, and then they'll put something into action, or they'll tell somebody, and it doesn't happen right away. Yeah. So therefore it's not from spirit, right? And that's not really what we're talking about.
No. And it doesn't always mean smooth sailing. Like, what's the quote for, the way that we become skilled is often through, like, I think, what did I post just the other day, that, adversity is part of it too, right? Like having something, even when we fast, we're putting our body into a semi state of emergency, so it can, adversity is good for us. I forget what all the studies are, but it is definitely important. I didn't mean to make it seem like, oh, it's always just smooth sailing. But I think I'm leaning into that as much as I can, because I do know that roadblocks will come, but I also trust myself as a person who's like, well, the path is the way, it's both of these things. But I think where, like, a lot of my exploration lately has been like, okay, I've learned a lot of lessons this way, because it's all just this grand experiment with life, isn't it? Right? If anyone tells you they know the exact way and they have the exact formula, just tell them to fuck off, because it's not true. And, my work is just leading people back to themselves, and especially through losses. We can learn so much about ourselves through a loss that a quote unquote gain might not even give us the same sort of like fruit for the soul. So I'm all about what shows up. But the thing I've really been trying to lean into is like, how clean of a vessel can I be for this signal that's coming through? Like, how can I affect this experiment by what I'm thinking and feeling and how I'm moving? In spite of the quote unquote adversities that come, because they're going to come, right? They're going to come. Even if you're on your yoga mat and you're praying every day, you're drinking your green juice, girl, something's going to happen, right? Because you have to test the metal, and you don't want to be a person who has untested metal. Yeah. So both, right?
Just to clarify, when you spoke, I was not receiving the impression that you were just talking about flow. I was just hearing from somebody who's not who's trying to learn how to trust their intuition,
Mm-hmm.
and the ego only attaching to that one part that you said
Yeah.
in the whole couple
Totally.
paragraphs that you said of like, and then it's the flow. And they're like, oh, the flow is the way, all this other stuff. So I believe you gave the whole picture. I just wanted people to.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you want people to know about your work? How about grief as an ally? Like, how can people get involved in that?
Well, I do these 1 month immersions, and I think I'm going to do them a couple times a year. But I think what I really like, I'm picturing a grief lodge in the fall and really just like having 8 people maybe, and just being in like literally tending a hearth, tending a fire, chopping wood, not chopping. We'll have the wood chopped for us, but the idea of making ourselves available to spirit through like our hands. So like if we're knitting something or we're making a soup, it's like all of this is grief work to me.
Yeah.
I'm also excited because I'm doing something called the Way of the Heart, which is kind of just everything we've been talking about soul and presence, and especially being creatively expressed, because a lot of people come to me for that work. And it's like sometimes your work's so obvious that you don't know it's your work and someone else needs to tell you. And so that's happened a lot in my life where it's like,
almost
oh, this is
always
exactly, because it's so, and not to be on the flow and easeful tip, but it is. And so yeah. And so that's how I know how I need to serve. And I'm really appreciative of that mirror that I'm finding in people in my community. But I'm doing a retreat in Mexico in May called the Way of the Heart, which is this immersion into slowing down and like redirecting that energy back to you. It's not about me as a leader or a person who's gathering people. It's about you and coming home to what's sacred for you and what's true for you, which may be different than what's real for me, but just like holding space for people to like bloom and blossom into like the unique wildflower that they are. And that's what I love to see. And, that's the work. So
that's why I love you, because you're right on target. I mean, we're doing the same work through different mediums. It's amazing.
Nice. Yeah.
So how can people find you? What's the best way for them to get in touch?
I always like to say all roads lead home. So if you do Ayesha Ophelia, I used to go by the Girlfriend Manifesto. However you know me, or maybe I'm new, my name, Ayesha Ophelia, will tap you into what's happening over here.
Amazing. Well, this has been transformative for me. So, and tremendously healing. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome, Betsy.
Yeah. And just get in touch. She's amazing. If this work really calls to you, just get a deep dive. You're in a safe space. So yeah, thank you for being here.
You're so welcome.
Ayesha is about to pre-launch her new school. I'm sure it's going to be amazing on June 22nd. It is also her 8-year anniversary of being out in the public. So congratulations to you, Ayesha, and to everyone involved in this amazing transformative school. Ayesha says all roads lead to the same place. So if you want to find out about this pre-launch and about the new school, just look up Ayesha Ophelia and you'll be able to find out more. This episode of Trust Yourself, the podcast, is created, written, and produced by me, your host, Betsy LaFay. Music provided by the amazing and generous Ben Talmi. Thanks, Ben. If you'd like to find out more about me and my work, and specifically how you can trust your intuition, head over to betsylafay.com. Thanks again for being here. See you next time. Oh yeah, and if you like the show, please subscribe and give us a review. It's one of the best ways to help us get the word out to other people like you. Of course, if you know anyone else that would find this podcast helpful, pass it along to them. Sharing is caring.